Hello everyone, the third Forbidden Battleground is out, so let's just start with the first one here, which has challenges for clearing with Yeless Legends and Mythical Realm. So let's start with the Yeless Legends clear. I'm going to be using all 5 of the Yeless SR characters. There are in fact only 5 Yeless SR characters, and I'm going to be using all of them. Thankfully one of the Yeless SRs is Alfred, and this map does have a bit of water for Alfred to play around in. So as you can see, the first thing I did was to send Alfred up to bait some of the enemies over to the left side of the screen. Now this job can be done by basically anybody who has good movement. Someone like Angelina would be pretty good at this task as well. Now while Alfred is an SR, he is actually uniquely suited to this sort of task. But I guess I'll come back to Alfred a little bit later, because first I'll explain what I'm doing with the rest of the team. To me, one of the biggest threats on this map is that stupid bishop. Just like in any other RPG, you want to take out the enemy's healer first, and if you don't, it's just going to make the fight a lot more annoying than it needs to be. So I lined up Oliver to take an attack here so that he can counter back for some damage. I also had Melania cast Gospel on him, so he could have an attack buff. As you probably already know, and you've noticed here, there is no buffer for Yeless in SRs, which is definitely one of the biggest hurdles to overcome when you're trying to clear with characters like this. But the addition of Melania helped out the budget Yeless team quite a bit. She not only has access to Gospel, which can be used as a substitute for a faction buff, but she also has her Guardian skill, which actually also gives an attack and defense buff. So you can see that after I took that first hit from the bishop, I actually backed up more and baited him again. In order to make this work, I need to make sure that Oliver is actually not too strong. I actually cannot counter to the point where this bishop will drop below 70% life, otherwise the AI is just going to make him prioritize healing himself, and I really need him to damage himself on Oliver some more. Because the enemy's stats in these level 70 maps is really high, and it's doubtful Oliver would have been able to take him out last turn. As you saw, after the bishop took 2 counterattacks, I decided to set him up for a kill using Close, and Move Again allows Oliver to get far away, because as you can see, I'm in range of the spider's AoE now. I need to make sure that I get the Sage's Hat / Igri buff onto Serena, so that the terrain created by the spider doesn't cause Moby down, because of course if Serena is not guarding, everybody else is just gonna die. On that note, that's why I had to reclass my Melania into a Holy class for this map. This map is like 80% demon units, and it's really hard to pass up the Holy advantage. And in fact, if I had not reclassed Melania, there's a pretty good chance she would just die to these AoEs eventually. Now as you can see right here, I'm lining up in kind of an odd way. I checked the Undead Knight's movement range so I can make sure to move Serena in such a way that the Undead Knight will not attack her directly. Because remember that Serena's revives from entrenchment can only activate if she is guarding somebody. I also cast Gospel on Serena here, because there's going to be even more AoEs coming out of that spider, and it's going to be hard to guarantee a spot to get the Sage's Hat buff on Serena every single turn. So I instead just Gospel her so I don't have to worry about it. So as you can see, Serena is going to lose her first life here. It's not a huge deal. One thing you'll notice very quickly is that as soon as Serena loses her soldiers, she'll crumble pretty fast to these demon enemies. They just have very high stats, and my Serena isn't particularly strong. It's unfortunate I don't have Exorcist trained, because they would be far superior to Zealots for this map, but you know, you just gotta use what you have. But because I've successfully split up these enemies so that I don't have to take them all on at once, the main group is relatively safe at the moment, with the biggest threat being that stupid Mist Dancer that can just swap positions with people, so I just shield bash her so I don't have to deal with her anymore. So let's go back to talking about Alfred for a second, because he's about to make a heroic sacrifice here. He runs up north of the river so that he can bait the enemies one last time. You may have noticed that I brought Templar Knights on the guy, even though they actually hurt his movement quite a bit, given all the forest and water on the left side of the map. This is purely so that Alfred doesn't die in one hit. Now I said earlier that Alfred is uniquely suited to this baiting task earlier in the video, and those of you who are familiar with Alfred's kit are probably not surprised by that statement, because the nice thing about Alfred is that he can maintain his high mobility for several turns straight, as opposed to some other units in the game who need to wait for the cooldowns to come back up to get their mobility again, like using Chivalry or Strike on Lanford or Brenda, or even comparing him to someone like Claret who needs to save up movement. Here, the moment I used the Beach Party skill on Alfred was actually very important, because at that point the Lancer was chasing Alfred, and unlike the Spider and the Undead Knight, the Lancer doesn't get slowed down by the river, so once he got close enough I needed to make sure to put Beach Party up on Alfred. That way I could take advantage of Alfred's water mobility tiles to move into the forest on the left side of the screen. Obviously I wouldn't have been able to move to the right, because at that point the entire enemy group was running down the Cinder Bridge. So by running into the force on the left a specific way, I am able to keep the attention of not just this Lancer and the 2 demon enemies, but I was also able to bait over the tanking demon, which is pretty important for the main group to be able to fight the enemies that they have to deal with without having to worry about a very annoying guarding demon standing around. Also, it's just one less attack that Serena has to take, which, as I explained earlier, it's kind of hard to keep Serena alive on this map. The final thing you'll notice about my Alfred is that he has his exclusive accessory. I actually didn't even put any martial spirits into the thing. I just bought it and it's only at level 20. Alfred's accessory is attack and skill based stats, so even if I had leveled up it wouldn't have improved his bulk at all. So it's not really that huge a deal. So I bring Alfred's accessory because it places him in water anytime he's attacked, with a 1-turn cooldown on the effect. So right after Beach Party wore off, I made sure that the Lancer could attack Alfred. The Lancer of course has advantage against Alfred's Templar Knight, but thanks to a combination of Last Rites and Alfred being a decently tanky character, he's able to survive this attack, and the water buff that he gets from that allows him to move out of the forest and up above the river, which is where I last placed him, for him to make his final heroic stand against the enemies. Now admittedly, Angelina could probably replace Alfred here pretty easily, and if you bring Angelina you could always try to gamble for some freezes on the enemies. And of course if you have Virage, he can fill this role as well, and probably do a decent bit of damage to all these enemies while he's dying and reviving like 7 times. But ultimately the point is to have someone on the left side distracting the enemies, while the main group tries to take apart the bite-sized groups of enemies that are sent towards them. Speaking of which, you can see that the main group has already taken care of the previous group, and they are now working on the final group of enemies. And you can see that I'm pretty much home free here. I just need to make sure to be very careful here, because these 4 enemies are still more than enough to kill Serena and then kill everyone else if I'm not careful. And I just need to make sure that I do everything I can to make the enemies attack Melania when possible. Because of course I want Melania's talent heal on Serena. Serena on this map cannot tank 2 or 3 enemies in a row without some kind of healing in between. As you've probably already noticed, and you're going to see more of that, Close is actually a huge DPS for me here because of just how many demons there are on this map. But you'll notice that even with the double holy Close, she still has trouble one-shotting some of these double demon enemies. So that really just goes to show just how high these guys' stats are. Now I do realize that most people probably don't have these 5 SR characters built, so I guess I should talk a little bit about what other options you have on this map. Honestly, I'm sure most of you have cleared this map already. The massive amount of demons makes it so that there are 2 characters who are really obvious choices for this map. The first most obvious one is of course Shelfenil. Shelfenil just completely dominates this map. I don't think there's really anything that needs to be qualified about that. You just need someone to tank the few non-demon enemies there are on this map, and the majority of players do have Landius raised for that task. Landius of course has Templar Knights he can bring to this map, although I guess in what you can say is a rare exception, Serena actually out-tanks him on this map, simply due to the fact that Serena has access to both Zealots and Exorcists. So aside from Shelfenil, the other obvious choice would be Sage of the Trees. Old Landius of course is also a holy class, and a lot of these enemies are cav type units, so he can help slow the advance of a lot of them as well, in addition to doing pretty good damage from his AoEs. You can of course also reclass Rachel into a holy class if you're so inclined, and of course there's also Lambda, who is usually run as a holy class as well. So for Yeless Legends, there's really no shortage of holy options for you to take here, and of course as far as tanking concerns go, you can make your life a lot easier if you bring Wheeler. It's unlikely any well-built tank, whether it's Landius or Serena, will have any trouble tanking all these enemies if they have Desperate Prayer up. Overall, if you allow yourself SSR characters, there's probably no shortage of good units to choose from. A little bit more tricky to do it with the SR characters, as you saw here, but there's not a whole lot else left to say. So once we finish watching Serena and co deal with the rest of these enemies, we can probably move on to the Mythical Realm clear. So the mythical clear I'm going to do is probably going to be a little bit less interesting than my Yeless Legends clear. I have no choice but to use at least 2 SSR characters in this strategy because there are only 3 SR/R characters in Mythical Realm. But hey, at least I'm going to be using all 3 of those, so there's that. Now, as I mentioned in the Yeless Legends clear, this map is full of all kinds of demon units, so there's really no logical choice to go with other than just Yulia. Yulia just completely dominates this map. Obviously, there's a handful of non-demon enemies, and those are going to be my biggest concern here. And the other problem is that Yulia actually cannot one-shot the majority of these enemies, and that's especially going to be a pain in the ass when I try to kill the bishop. But for now, I'm just going to set up. I'm going to be using a strategy very similar to the one I used for the Yeless Legends clear. Instead of Alfred being sent to the left to bait, I sent Volzel plus Jessica to the left to bait. Meanwhile, I just buff up Yulia with Almeida and Sophia. Now, of course, being that on this map there are a number of heal blocks and silences that are possible, especially from the annoying black holes, I can completely negate any concern about that by just having Almeida cast Shield on Yulia and having Sophia cast Strengthen on Yulia. So just like with the Yeless Legends clear, I use a unit to bait down the bishop. However, in this case I don't have a physical unit I can use to bait him down and do decent amounts of counter damage to his Shrine Maidens. So Yulia is going to have to do almost all the damage to this bishop. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, Yulia isn't really capable of killing this guy. At least not while he's still at such high HP. So that's going to be kind of a pain for me, because I need to make sure that this bishop dies, otherwise he's just going to heal everybody all the time and it's just going to make the fight drag out a lot longer than I wanted to. So while Yulia, Almeida, and Sophia try to take care of the main group in the middle here, Volzel and Jessica are just going to be distracting a couple of the enemies on the left. Now I do know some players don't really like resorting to Volzel, but I will point out that I'm not going to go with some kind of RNG strategy here. I use a pretty non-RNG heavy set, or at the very least as non-RNG as Volzel can get, I guess. So I brought his crappy summon skill just to distract the enemies for a few turns longer. I brought Earthquake, which unlike Black Hole has consistent debuffs. I'll still get a random debuff from his talent, but at least you know that I'm not just sitting here casting Black Hole and fishing for some kind of crazy debuff to happen. And of course I also brought Sleep, which is also a good stalling tool. For Jessica, I brought Teleport of course. And I also brought Meteor, which you saw me cast a little bit ago. Meteor is still a really great skill to have for PvE. It's an HP % fixed damage attack, so for maps like this where they are actually vulnerable to it, it's definitely nice to bring Meteor to these kinds of situations, especially if you can stall them in some way, like you can on this map. So now that I've taken care of the bishop by having Yulia finish him off, my big concern is probably this Mist Dancer. Now believe it or not, it is actually possible for Yulia to die to a combination of multiple demon attacks. These guys just have very high stats, so even though Yulia does have that crazy Holy versus Demon bonus, she still takes some decent chip damage from the guys. So regeneration from Sophia is going to help a lot in that regard. But of course, like I said, the big problem here really is that Mist Dancer. She does the bulk of the damage to Yulia during this enemy phase, and one of the annoying things is that she moves first. So not only does Yulia get attacked from a range that she cannot counter and thus heal herself up a little bit more, but it also means it's going to leave Yulia at low HP for the rest of the enemy phase, which is why, like I said, there's still some risk of Yulia dying to a demon attack, because it really doesn't matter how much of an advantage you have. If you only have like 1000 HP left or something, it's still pretty easy for you to die. But aside from that, you can see that I'm already in a pretty comfortable position, and all I need to do is have Yulia take out the rest of the enemies in the middle, and then go left and kill the rest of them. So overall you can see this map is trivialized pretty heavily with just one really strong holy unit. Now spoilers for the tail end of the video, you are going to see me lose Volzel in this video, but that only happens because I cast an Earthquake and I get a quote lucky unquote silence on one of these spiders on the left here, which causes the spider to, instead of casting AoE, just do a single target attack on Volzel, which is what gets him killed. So just for the record, this latter video also can cover for the Deathless run if you wanted to. It's just that I was way too lazy to re-record this because of some stupid random silence at the tail end of the video. I'm lazy, don't blame me. But yeah, if you don't have Yulia, there are a number of other units you can choose. Yeless Legends and Mythical actually share quite a few key units, so a lot of the units that I pointed out earlier in the Yeless Legends clear, such as Old Landius and Lambda, are obviously very useful to do lots of damage to the demon enemies on this map, and of course Old Landius is also a buff for your team. You could probably also put Arian Rod in our Holy class and blow up this map as well, But I'm guessing most people who have Arian Rod don't have her Holy class all stoned up and everything, so I don't think there's really any need to bring Arian Rod here unless you really don't have any other holy units to choose. Yusuke is also kind of decent here, but he does have the problem of running out of turns on his transform, which can be kind of tricky. And finally, Gizaroth is obviously really useful here. I'm using Bolzol in my clear here, but he's very easily replaced with Gizaroth, who will not only faction buff the team, but will also have a construct that can distract the enemies. And if you decide to go for a more traditional tanking team against this map, Rosensteel is in the Mythical Realm faction, so the debuffs that get thrown around a bit in this map aren't even really a concern for a mythical team. Overall, this first Battleground and this third wave of Forbidden Battlegrounds is pretty simple. Just throw holy units at them, like I said. Anyway, I don't think I have anything left to say. I guess you can enjoy the rest of the video and watching Yulia beat up a bunch of demon units.
何をしてるのか分かっているのか。計画通り。いいですね。どこを指していますか？何かお手伝いできることありますか？よろしくお願いしますね。はい。これはあまり使いたくないですね。私が皆さんを守ります。ここよろしくお願いしますね。あれ？気づかないうちにごめんなさいね。剣はどこを指していますか？いいですね。かわいそうに。何かお手伝い。剣はどこを指していますか？